The storm that night came like a living thing, wild, merciless, and unending. Wind tore through the forest, bending the pines like reeds, and rain beat against the world in sheets so thick it blurred the line between land and sky. Through that storm trudged Evelyn Carter, her skirts heavy with mud, her breath ragged in the freezing air. She had been walking for hours, no, days perhaps, fleeing from a life that had turned to ashes. Once, she had been the daughter of a wealthy St. Louis banker, destined for a fine marriage and a respectable home. But that dream had soured into a nightmare when her fiancé, Charles Whitmore, revealed himself as a cruel, possessive man who saw her as property rather than a partner. When she dared to end the engagement, her father sided with him, casting her out with nothing but a satchel of clothes and a heart full of shame. For 2 weeks, Evelyn had wandered the trails of the Indian Territory, moving westward in search of freedom, or perhaps punishment. Her last meal had been a half loaf of stale bread 2 days ago. Her only companion, a horse named Lily, had bolted during a thunderclap, leaving her stranded in the wilderness. The storm had followed her since. By the time she stumbled upon the faint glow of firelight through the trees, Evelyn was half delirious. She forced her way toward it, branches clawing at her cloak until she found herself before a small log cabin tucked against a rocky bluff. Smoke rose weakly from the chimney. The door stood slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. She hesitated, then knocked. The door swung open, revealing a man who filled the frame like a shadow carved from the storm itself. Talon Black Fox, they would later call him, the giant Cherokee. His dark hair clung to his broad shoulders, and his eyes, black as obsidian, burned with both exhaustion and fury. Yet it wasn't his size that struck her. It was the small bundle he cradled against his chest. The bundle whimpered. "My God," Evelyn whispered. "Is that?" "A baby," he said, his voice low and rough. "She's burning up." "Her mother—" He stopped, jaw tightening. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw the still figure on the bed behind him, covered with a thin sheet. The truth hit her like a hammer. The mother was dead. Talon's face was carved from stone, but his hands trembled as he held the child out. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "You're the first soul I've seen in 3 days. If you know anything at all, help her." Evelyn's body moved before her mind caught up. She pushed into the cabin, dripping water onto the floor, and reached for the baby. The child was impossibly small, her skin flushed with fever. Evelyn pressed her lips to the infant's forehead. It burned like fire. "Boil water," she ordered. "I need clean rags, herbs, anything you can find." "Hurry!" Talon hesitated only a moment before obeying. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his strength silent, his motions precise. Together they worked through the long night, Evelyn cooling the baby's skin, Talon grinding herbs with his knife's handle, whispering prayers in Cherokee beneath his breath. The cabin became their world, a fragile bubble of warmth surrounded by howling wind and grief. Evelyn's fingers brushed his as they worked, and though they barely spoke, something passed between them, a silent recognition of shared loneliness. When dawn finally came, the fever broke. The baby stirred, let out a tiny cry, and nestled against Evelyn's chest. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Talon sank to his knees beside the bed, his massive hands covering his face. For the first time since she'd entered, he wept. The light from the fire flickered over his shoulders, revealing scars, old wounds, deep and deliberate. This man had fought battles, lost people, carried burdens she couldn't yet name. And now, holding that child, he looked utterly lost. "She's going to live," Evelyn said softly. "She needs milk, rest, warmth. But she'll live." Talon looked up, eyes glistening. "You saved her." Evelyn shook her head. "You did. You kept her alive long enough for me to help." He was silent a moment, then rose to his full height. The top of her head barely reached his chest. His presence filled the small cabin like thunder. When he finally spoke again, his words came slowly, as if torn from his soul. "There's something else," he said. "Something you don't know." He moved to a wooden cradle near the fire, smoothing a blanket over it. "The council will come soon. The elders of my people. They know her mother was white. They will decide if my daughter can stay with me or if she'll be sent away, to one of her mother's kin. They don't think a man like me can raise a child of 2 worlds alone?" Evelyn frowned. Surely they wouldn't take her from her father. He met her gaze, and she saw the truth in his eyes. "They will," he said simply. Unless I have a wife. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Evelyn blinked, unsure she'd heard right. A wife? Talon nodded slowly. A family is sacred. If the council believes my daughter is being raised in one, they will not interfere. But if they find me alone with a child of mixed blood, they'll say she belongs elsewhere. Evelyn's stomach twisted. You mean, you need someone to pretend? For 1 week, he said quietly. That's all I ask. 1 week until the council leaves. After that, you can go wherever you wish. It was absurd, dangerous, reckless. She didn't even know this man's full name, didn't know if she could trust him. Yet when she looked at the baby, tiny, helpless, her skin still flushed, Evelyn felt her heart break. This child had already lost one parent. Could she let her lose another? Talon must have seen the conflict in her face. I'll not ask more than that, he murmured. You'll have food, a warm bed, and my word no harm will come to you. But if you stay, if you say you're my wife, you'll save her life. Evelyn turned toward the window. The rain had eased, but the world outside was still gray and endless. She thought of her father's cold eyes, of Whitmore's hand gripping her arm too tightly, of the silence that had followed her every step west. No one had needed her since her mother died. No one had looked at her with hope, until now. She looked back at the man before her, the fierce, grieving giant holding on to faith by a thread, and the child who had found sleep in her arms. The decision rose inside her like a tide she couldn't fight. All right, she whispered, for 1 week. Talon exhaled slowly as if he'd been holding his breath since the moment she arrived. His eyes softened, gratitude breaking through the storm of grief. You have my thanks, he said, voice low and reverent. I swear you'll not regret it. He reached for her hand, a brief, tentative touch, warm and rough. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both felt something stir beneath the surface of that fragile agreement. A promise neither of them fully understood yet. Evelyn glanced at the cradle. The baby, his daughter, slept peacefully now. What will you call her? She asked. Talon's gaze softened. Her mother named her before she passed. Wren. Because even the smallest bird has the loudest heart. Wren, Evelyn repeated, smiling faintly. It suits her. Outside, the storm began to die. The first hint of sunlight touched the edge of the valley, turning the wet earth to gold. Inside the cabin, two strangers stood side by side, bound by necessity, by sorrow, and by something deeper still, something that neither dared name. Evelyn didn't know that by agreeing to his plea, she was stepping into a story that would change both of their lives forever. She only knew that for the first time in years, her heart felt steady, and that the giant Cherokee's quiet strength had silenced the fear that once ruled her. As the dawn broke fully over the horizon, Talon placed a hand over the child's cradle and whispered a prayer in his language. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she understood their meaning. Family, protection, love, and so it began, the week of pretending, a week that would soon blur the lines between truth and lie, duty and desire, heart and home. Morning arrived on the Black Fox homestead with quiet gray light filtering through the cabin's single window. For the first time in years, Talon felt something close to calm. The storm had passed, his baby had survived, and the stranger who had appeared from the wilderness, Evelyn Carter, was still there, sitting beside the cradle and watching over Wren as if she had been born to that place. Talon wasn't a man who believed much in fate, but as he watched Evelyn tuck the blanket around the sleeping infant, he felt a strange pull in his chest, a sense that perhaps the storm hadn't brought her by chance. Evelyn, for her part, was trying to make sense of the bargain she had struck. The cabin smelled of smoke, cedar, and something faintly wild like pine and leather. She wasn't used to silence like this. It pressed against her ears, made her too aware of her own heartbeat. Yet beneath that unease was something gentler, peace perhaps, or belonging. She turned to find Talon standing by the door, his broad shoulders outlined by the morning light. He was sharpening a knife, his movements smooth, methodical, precise. You didn't have to stay up all night, he said quietly. You can rest now. I couldn't, Evelyn replied, voice soft. She's too small, too fragile. Talon's dark eyes lifted to hers, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. There was no hostility there, only gratitude, and a sadness deeper than words. The day unfolded slowly. Talon taught her the rhythm of the homestead, how to draw water from the river, how to chop kindling for the fire, how to grind cornmeal with the stone bowl near the hearth. Evelyn had never done such things before, but her hands learned quickly. There was comfort in the work, in the steady heartbeat of ordinary life. By afternoon, the storm had left behind a world washed clean. Mist hung low over the trees and the sky turned from slate to pale blue. Evelyn stepped outside to hang blankets by the line and found herself staring at the beauty around her. The wide valley, the silver river winding below, the hawk circling overhead. It felt untouched by the world she had fled. Talon joined her a few minutes later, carrying Wren in one arm. The sight of that giant of a man holding a tiny infant was almost too tender to bear. Evelyn couldn't help smiling. "You're very good with her," she said. His lips curved faintly. "She's all I have left of her mother." Evelyn hesitated. "You loved her deeply, didn't you?" Talon looked out toward the horizon. She was good, kind, but she didn't belong to this place. The life here, it's hard for those not born to it. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I failed her when I couldn't save her." Evelyn wanted to say something, anything, to take the pain from his eyes. But before she could, Wren stirred in his arms and he turned his attention back to the child. Watching him, Evelyn realized something she hadn't expected. This wasn't a fierce warrior or a hardened scout. This was a man trying to learn how to be both father and mother to a helpless infant. That evening, they ate together by the fire. Talon had hunted a rabbit, and Evelyn cooked stew from it with a few wild herbs she'd found near the stream. It wasn't the elegant dining she had once known, but somehow it felt more real, more human. As they ate, Talon spoke of the Cherokee council that would arrive in 3 days. "They'll ask questions," he warned. "About you, about how we met when we married. They'll want to know if we share the same home, the same life." Evelyn straightened her back, nervous. "Then we should rehearse the story." He gave a short nod. "We met on the edge of the settlement where I trade hides for tools. You were visiting family there. And you asked me to marry you after a month?" she said, raising an eyebrow. His mouth quirked. "You said yes because you pitied me." Evelyn laughed softly, and the sound startled them both. It had been so long since she had truly laughed that it felt strange and beautiful, like rediscovering music. They spent the next few hours filling in details: where they married, what her favorite food was, the name of her family's horse. It became a game, each answer weaving them closer together. But sometimes, in the silences between their questions, something else flickered in the air, something neither of them dared to name. As night deepened, the cabin grew quiet. Wren slept soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling beside the fire. Evelyn rose from her chair to lay a fresh log on the flames. When she turned back, she found Talon watching her. "You don't have to be afraid," he said suddenly. "Of what?" she asked. "Of me." "Of this place," she shook her head. "I'm not afraid of you, Talon. I just don't know what I am anymore." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You're someone who saved my child's life." That's enough, but Evelyn wasn't sure it was. Because every hour she spent in that cabin, every glance, every shared word was blurring the lines she had drawn to keep her heart safe. She had agreed to play the role of wife for 1 week, but already the pretending felt too natural. On the 3rd day, the Cherokee council arrived. 5 men on horseback, wrapped in woven blankets, their faces grave and weathered by time. Evelyn's heart pounded as Talon went out to greet them. She stayed inside with Wren, smoothing her hair, trying to remember to breathe. When they entered the cabin, their dark eyes studied her with quiet curiosity. Chief Waya, an elder with silver hair braided down his back, was the first to speak. "You are the woman Talon calls his wife?" Evelyn rose, bowing her head respectfully. "Yes, sir. I am Evelyn Blackfox." The name sounded strange on her tongue. Yet it fit somehow, like a garment that had been waiting all along to be worn. The council questioned her gently at first. How long she and Talon had been married, how they met, whether she knew the Cherokee ways. Evelyn answered each with as much honesty as she could without betraying their secret. Her hands trembled only once when Wren began to fuss and Talon stepped forward to take the baby. His big hands cradled the child with such tenderness that even the elder's expressions softened. When the questioning was over, Chief Waya nodded. "Your child is strong." "That is good. A family that endures loss together grows unbreakable." Talon bowed his head. "We thank you." After they left, Evelyn sank into the nearest chair, her knees weak. Talon laid Wren in her arms and sat beside her. "You did well," he said quietly. Her heart fluttered at the warmth in his tone. "I thought they could see right through me." "They saw what they needed to see," he replied. A woman with courage. A mother who'd fight for her child. The word mother caught in her chest. For just a second, she let herself believe it was true. That this was her home, her family, her child. She felt it so deeply that tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. Talon noticed. He reached out, his rough hand brushing the tears away with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Don't cry," he murmured. "It's over." But she knew it wasn't. Something had changed between them, something that couldn't be undone. Later, as the fire burned low, Evelyn sat by the cradle watching Wren sleep. Talon moved quietly around the cabin, the floor creaking under his weight. Every now and then their eyes met, and each time she felt a strange warmth bloom inside her chest. When she finally lay down on the narrow bed across the room, sleep came slowly. She could hear him outside, chopping wood under the stars. Each steady thud of the axe echoed like a heartbeat. Evelyn turned toward the window, whispering to herself, "It's just 1 week," but even then, she knew she was lying, because something about that place, that man and that child had already claimed her heart. And no matter what the council decided, she was no longer the same woman who had stumbled into his cabin on a storm-torn night. The days that followed the council's visit should have brought peace, but instead a new unease settled over the cabin like a shadow. The act was supposed to last 1 week, and yet neither Evelyn nor Talon dared to speak of what would happen when it ended. For Talon, the silence was a strange kind of comfort. It allowed him to watch her, really watch her, without needing to name what he felt. He found himself memorizing the small details, the way her hair caught sunlight, the way she hummed to the baby without realizing it, the way her laughter made the lonely walls of his home feel like a living place again. For Evelyn, the comfort was dangerous. She had come here running from a life that had stripped her of pride and safety, a man from her past who had treated her as a possession rather than a person. And yet, in this place with Talon, she was beginning to feel something she thought she'd lost forever. Safe. But peace is a fragile thing on the frontier, and it often breaks in the quietest moments. It began 3 nights later when Talon returned from setting traps along the river. He stepped inside to find Evelyn sitting beside the cradle, pale as the moonlight spilling across the floor. "What is it?" he asked, instantly alert. She pointed toward the window. Someone was watching the cabin. Talon crossed to the door, stepping out into the darkness. The wind whispered through the pines, and the air carried the faint scent of smoke. Not his. He crouched, running his fingers through the dirt. Boot tracks. Too deep to be Cherokee moccasins. Someone had been here, close enough to peer inside. When he returned, Evelyn was holding Wren, trembling slightly. "It's all right," he said softly, closing the door behind him. Whoever it was, they're gone now. But her fear told him something deeper. This wasn't just about a stranger in the dark. This was something older. He crouched before her. "Tell me who you're running from." Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then she whispered, "A man named Marshall Kane, a ranch owner near the border. He courted me, promised marriage. But when my father died, he wanted my inheritance more than me. When I refused to sign it over, he said he'd make me regret ever defying him." Talon's jaw tightened. "And you think he followed you here?" "I think he never stopped." He looked toward the door again, his mind already working through possibilities. Kane was a powerful name. A man like that could pay others to do his hunting for him. "We'll leave at first light," Talon said. "There's a canyon north of here. It'll be safer there." But Evelyn shook her head. "No, I won't run anymore. Not from him." Her voice was soft but firm. Talon studied her for a long moment, the fear still there, yes, but beneath it, steel. The kind of strength that came only when a person had lost everything once and refused to lose again. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll fight if we must." The next day dawned cold and gray. Talon worked outside, reinforcing the fences and setting hidden traps along the paths leading to the cabin. Evelyn stayed indoors with Wren, preparing food, tending the fire, though her thoughts were miles away. At one point, she stepped to the window and saw Talon standing shirtless by the corral, his skin glistening with sweat as he swung an axe through a thick log. There was power in him, yes, but also a quiet patience, a stillness like the mountains. He looked like someone carved from the very earth he protected. When he noticed her watching, he paused, meeting her gaze with a faint smile that sent a shiver down her spine. She turned quickly away, pretending to fuss with Wren's blanket. But her heart wouldn't slow. By evening, the two of them shared supper in near silence. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming with it, something heavy, inevitable. "Talon," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "What happens when the week ends?" He didn't look at her right away. He set down his spoon, staring into the fire. "You'll decide what you want. The council believes you're my wife now. No one will question it if you stay, and if I go, then I'll ride with you until you reach safety." There was no bitterness in his tone, no attempt to hold her, but that only made it harder to bear. She wanted him to tell her to stay, to say the words she couldn't bring herself to, but Talon was a man of restraint, of duty, and he'd promised only to protect her, not to love her. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The wind rattled the shutters, and Wren stirred restlessly in her cradle. Evelyn rose to comfort her, whispering softly, "Hush now, little one. You're safe." But when she looked up, she froze. A shadow moved outside the window. Evelyn's breath caught, and she turned toward Talon's bed across the room. "Talon," she hissed. "Someone's out there." He was awake in an instant. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for her to stay quiet. Moving to the door, he listened, then pushed it open, stepping into the darkness. A heartbeat later, a gunshot split the night. Evelyn screamed, clutching Wren to her chest. Talon fired back once, twice, and the sound echoed through the hills. When he returned, his expression was fierce, controlled. "Two men," he said, "riders. They didn't expect resistance. Are they gone, for now?" Evelyn's hands shook as she held the baby closer. "It's him," she whispered. "Kane sent them." Talon placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "He won't reach you here, I promise." But deep down, he knew promises were fragile things in a land like this. The next morning, he found the riders' camp not far from the river. 2 horses, 1 pack of supplies marked with Kane's ranch insignia. They were scouts, advance eyes for a larger group. When he returned to the cabin, Evelyn was waiting on the porch, pale but resolute. "You found them," she said quietly. "I did. And I know what comes next." Her gaze lifted to his. "Tell me. They'll return with more men. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tonight." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Then what do we do?" Talon stepped closer, his voice low, almost tender. "We stand together." And in that moment, she realized he wasn't just talking about the fight ahead. He was offering something else, something wordless but powerful, trust. She nodded. Together. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Talon showed her how to load the rifle, how to move quietly, how to keep the baby safe. Evelyn learned fast, every motion driven by instinct and fear. When darkness fell again, they lit no fire. They sat in silence, the baby asleep between them, listening to the wind. Then faintly they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. Talon rose, rifle in hand, eyes sharp as flint. "They're here." The fight that followed was short and brutal. Kane's men came with torches and guns, thinking the cabin would fall easily. They didn't know the land like Talon did. Every trap, every ambush point turned the ground itself into his ally. Evelyn stayed inside, cradling Wren, heart pounding with every gunshot. Then in the distance she heard a voice, a man's shout that froze her blood. "Evelyn, you think you can hide from me?" Marshal Kane, he was here himself. Talon stepped out from behind a tree, rifle raised. "She's not yours," he said. Kane sneered. "You think she belongs to you, savage?" The word cut deep, but Talon didn't flinch. He fired once, the shot echoing across the valley. Kane's horse reared, throwing him to the ground. The rest of his men scattered. When the dust settled, silence returned. Evelyn rushed out, the baby still in her arms. "Talon!" He turned, breath heavy, eyes dark with emotion. "It's over." She looked at him, really looked, and something inside her broke open. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "No, it's not. Because I can't pretend anymore." He frowned slightly. "Pretend?" Evelyn stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You asked me to be your wife for 1 week. But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. I don't want to leave, not now, not ever." Talon's expression softened, the guarded strength in his face giving way to something raw, vulnerable. He took the baby gently from her arms and looked down at Wren's sleeping face, then back at Evelyn. "Then don't," he said simply. Stay. And as the dawn rose over the valley, painting the world gold and quiet again, Evelyn realized she finally had what she'd been running from and searching for all at once: home. The dawn after the battle broke clean and gold, spilling light across the broken fences, the trampled earth, and the quiet hills that had witnessed everything. The air smelled of smoke and wet pine, but also, finally, of peace. Evelyn stood by the doorway with Wren in her arms, watching Talon move through the wreckage. The giant Cherokee moved with his usual quiet precision, stacking broken boards, burying what was left of the men who'd come to destroy them. There was no triumph in him, only a steady resolve, the calm of a man who fought because he must, not because he wanted to. Every swing of the shovel was a reminder of what he'd done for her, what he'd risked. She'd been nothing to him but a stranger lost in a storm, and yet he'd fought a war to keep her safe. When he finally turned toward her, sweat and dust streaking his skin, Evelyn felt her heart twist painfully. He looked at her as if she were sunlight after endless rain. "It's over," she said softly. "For now," he replied. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. Then almost shyly he added, "You should rest." She nodded, though what she really wanted was to walk to him, to place her hand on his chest and tell him what she could no longer keep buried. Instead, she carried the baby inside. Days passed. The rhythm of life returned, slow but steady. Talon repaired the fences, tended to the horses, and hunted when the weather allowed. Evelyn cooked, sewed, and sang softly to Wren in the evenings, but the pretending was gone. There was no act left between them anymore, only the quiet familiarity of two souls who had chosen, without words, to belong to each other. Evelyn noticed it in small moments. The way Talon brushed his hand over her back when passing behind her. The way he said her name, slow and reverent as if it were a prayer. The way his eyes softened whenever she held the baby. At night, after Wren had fallen asleep, they would sit by the fire together. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. Silence had become its own language, gentle, intimate, heavy with unspoken feeling. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Evelyn found herself staring at Talon's hands. Strong, calloused, scarred by years of hard living. He caught her gaze and smiled faintly. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That those hands have done too much fighting," she said. He shrugged lightly. "They've done some mending too." Her smile wavered. "Do you ever wish you could start over? Live a life without all the loss?" He looked into the fire, the glow reflecting in his eyes. "No, every loss brought me here." Evelyn's breath caught. "Here? With you?" The simplicity of the words undid her. She rose, walking toward him slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Talon!" He stood too, tall and steady, his presence filling the room. She could feel the heat from his skin even before he touched her. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I know it feels like home." He lifted his hand, tracing his fingers along her jaw. "You don't have to know," he said softly. "You just have to stay." And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Evelyn let herself believe she could. The days that followed were softer, warmer somehow. The valley turned green with early summer, and the scent of wildflowers drifted through the open windows. Evelyn learned the land, how to tell which herbs healed wounds, which berries could be crushed for dye. Talon taught her how to ride bareback, how to read the clouds before a storm. Sometimes, when the baby slept, they would wander to the river together. She would sit on a flat stone, feet in the cool water, while he carved small wooden toys for Wren. The easy companionship between them grew into something deeper. Quiet devotion. One afternoon, Evelyn caught Talon watching her as she brushed Wren's hair. "What is it?" she asked with a small smile. "You," he said simply. "You look like you've always belonged here." Her chest ached. "And yet I came from a world so different from yours." "Then maybe the world was wrong," he murmured. Evelyn laughed softly, but tears blurred her vision. "You speak like a man who doesn't know what he deserves." "I know exactly what I don't deserve," he said. "And yet the Creator still sent you to my door that night." She couldn't answer. Instead, she reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining easily, as if they had always fit that way. But even in peace, ghosts linger. One morning, a rider arrived, a messenger from the Cherokee Council. He carried news that the men who'd attacked had been identified as Kane's men, and that word of the attack had reached the settlements. Some whispered that Talon had taken revenge. Others called it justice. Evelyn feared it would mean trouble, that someone might demand she return to the settlement to testify. But when she voiced her fears, Talon only said, "You have nothing to prove to them. You are my wife now. They will not touch you. Wife." The word hung between them like sunlight. He said it so naturally as though it had always been true. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rain, her thoughts tangled between fear and longing. At last she rose, crossing the room to where Talon sat by the dying fire. He looked up as she approached. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's the word you used earlier, wife?" "Yes," he nodded slowly. "Does it trouble you?" "No," she whispered. "It feels right. But I keep thinking, what if you only said it to protect me?" He rose from his chair, standing before her. "Evelyn, when I asked you to pretend I was desperate, I needed to save my child. But every day since then I've realized something." "What?" she breathed. "That I don't want you to pretend anymore." The space between them vanished. His hand came to rest gently at the back of her neck, his thumb brushing her skin with reverence. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm as she pressed her hand to his chest. "Talon," she whispered, her voice trembling. He kissed her then, slow, steady, unhurried. It wasn't a kiss of passion born from fear or need. It was one of belonging, of quiet recognition. The storm that had brought her into his life had finally passed, leaving only warmth in its wake. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn leaned her forehead against his, whispering, "Then let it be forever." And he answered simply, "It already is." Summer deepened. The valley bloomed with life again. Wren's laughter filled the cabin, and Evelyn found herself smiling more than she ever had before. She tended a small garden out back, while Talon carved a cradle of polished cedar for their child. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the world in gold and crimson, Evelyn said quietly, "You once told me you failed the woman who came before me." Talon's gaze darkened. "I did." She reached for his hand. "Then let me tell you something. You didn't fail this one." He looked at her, emotion flickering through his eyes. "Evelyn, no," she said gently. "You saved me. You gave me back the courage I thought I'd lost." He squeezed her hand. "And you gave me back life." They sat there until the stars came out, the soft weight of Wren asleep between them, the future unwritten but bright. The week had long since ended. The act had long since fallen away. What remained was real, the slow, quiet building of a life, the mending of two broken hearts into something whole. And as the night deepened, Evelyn rested her head against Talon's shoulder, knowing at last that she had stopped running. The week she'd agreed to pretend had become forever. The moon rose like silver fire over the valley that night. The land was still, the river gliding smooth as glass, the whisper of wind threading through pine. Inside the cabin, a gentle quiet wrapped around Evelyn, Talon, and baby Wren, a peace so complete it almost didn't seem real. Evelyn sat near the hearth, humming softly while she rocked the baby to sleep. Wren's eyelids fluttered, her tiny hands curling around Evelyn's finger. Across the room, Talon carved quietly at his workbench, shaping a cradle charm from a piece of cedar. The rhythmic scrape of his knife was the sound of comfort, of home. It had been months since that night when Evelyn had first stumbled into his life, a frightened stranger caught in a storm. The weeks that followed had turned her from visitor to caretaker, from caretaker to partner, and finally to something deeper. Something that neither of them dared to name, though it colored every glance, every touch, every word spoken in the quiet. But tonight felt different. Final somehow. The air carried a weight of endings and beginnings, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Evelyn glanced toward Talon, her heart swelling at the sight of him. His hair fell loose around his shoulders, catching the light like raven's wings. His strong hands moved with care, shaping the wood as though it were alive. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence was full of meaning. She had learned to read his moods by the tilt of his head, the lift of his eyes, the pause of his breath. She whispered softly, "Talon?" He looked up. "Yes?" She hesitated, then said, "You've given me everything. A home, safety, love I never thought I'd know, but you've never asked for anything in return." He studied her for a long moment before setting his knife aside. Rising from his chair, he crossed the room and knelt beside her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I didn't have to ask," he said quietly. "You've already given me more than I knew how to want." She smiled faintly, her eyes wet. "Still, I want to give you something more, something lasting." He tilted his head, slightly curious. "What would that be?" "Forever," she whispered. For a moment he didn't move. Then he reached out, brushing his fingers along her cheek, his touch reverent. "You already gave me that too." The night deepened. After Wren had drifted to sleep, Talon lifted her gently into her cradle, setting the tiny cedar charm above her. Evelyn watched as he bent down, whispering something in Cherokee, words of blessing and protection. When he turned back, she was standing in the doorway, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Come outside," she said softly. "There's something I want to show you." Talon followed her into the open air. The sky stretched wide above them, endless and glittering with stars. The world felt new again, fresh and washed clean by all they'd survived. Evelyn stepped barefoot into the grass, lifting her face toward the heavens. "When I was a girl," she said, "I used to dream of this kind of quiet. I'd look at the stars and imagine that somewhere out there, someone was wishing on the same one I was." Talon smiled faintly. "And did you find him?" She looked at him, her eyes glowing in the starlight. "I think I did." They stood in silence for a long time, the night air cool and fragrant around them. The river whispered in the distance. An owl called softly from the trees. Finally, Talon spoke. "The stars tell stories," he said. "My people believe they are our ancestors, watching us, guiding us when we lose our way." Evelyn smiled. "Then they must have worked hard to bring me to your door." He took a slow breath, his voice low. "I used to think I'd live my life alone. That love wasn't meant for men who carry too many ghosts. But then you came, Talon," she whispered, stepping closer. "You taught me that love isn't about forgetting the past. It's about surviving it, together." Her heart swelled until it hurt. "And you taught me that safety isn't walls or distance. It's a person." The space between them dissolved. He reached for her hand, pulling her gently against his chest. The world fell away. She could hear only his heartbeat, steady and sure beneath her ear. For a long time they stood like that, two souls who had wandered too far finally finding rest. Later, they sat by the river's edge. Talon's hand rested around her shoulders as the stars shimmered above. Evelyn leaned into him, content. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "That I don't want this night to end," she murmured. "Because when the sun rises, I'll have to believe this is real and not just a dream." He turned to her, his gaze soft. "It's real, Evelyn. Every moment, every breath," she smiled through her tears. "Then promise me something. Anything. That no matter what comes, no matter how hard the world gets, you won't shut me out. You won't go back to carrying it all alone." He looked into her eyes, seeing all the gentleness and fire there, all the faith she had in him. "Then promise me something too," he said. "What?" "That you'll stay. Not because you owe me. Not because of Wren, but because your heart tells you to." Evelyn's answer was a whisper carried by the wind. "It already has." He smiled, drawing her close again. "Then we're bound. Not by words or papers, but by the Creator himself." And under that vast, unbroken sky, he kissed her. The world seemed to pause, the river stilled, the wind hushed, even the stars seemed to lean closer to watch. It was a kiss of peace, of promise, of lives entwined beyond time. The weeks that followed were golden. The valley flourished with summer light. Talon built a second cabin nearby, strong enough to stand for generations. Evelyn filled it with laughter, herbs hanging from the rafters and the sweet scent of fresh bread. The people from the Cherokee settlement came often, bringing gifts and blessings. They spoke of how love could rise even from ashes, and though some whispered about the white woman who had married a Cherokee, most saw what mattered, the truth that shone from the way they looked at each other. Wren grew quickly, her bright eyes reflecting both her father's strength and her mother's warmth. She toddled between them, her laughter a song that bound the house together. One afternoon, as Evelyn rocked Wren to sleep, Talon returned from the fields with a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a simple silver ring, handmade, the surface etched with 2 stars. "I traded 3 pelts for it," he said shyly. "It isn't much," Evelyn's eyes filled. "It's everything." He took her hand, sliding the ring gently onto her finger. Then let this be our promise under the stars. No end, no beginning, just always. She rose, cupping his face in her hands. Always, she whispered back. That night, after the baby had fallen asleep, they sat outside again beneath the starlit sky where their promise had begun. The air was still warm from the day, carrying the scent of cedar and river grass. Evelyn leaned her head against Talon's shoulder. "Do you ever think about the night we met?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "Do you ever wish it had happened differently?" He shook his head. "No, if I hadn't been desperate, if the storm hadn't come, if you hadn't been lost, I might never have found you." She smiled. "Then maybe storms aren't always a curse." "No," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Sometimes they bring us home." They sat in silence, watching the stars drift above them. The same stars that had guided his ancestors, that had watched over her when she fled her old life, now bore witness to something rare, love born not from chance, but from courage, from the willingness to heal. As the night deepened, Talon whispered something in Cherokee, his voice soft as a prayer. "What does it mean?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "It means the stars will remember us." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her heart. She knew then that no matter what time might bring, their story would live on in the land, in the trees, in the laughter of their child. The woman who had once been lost had found her home. The warrior who had once been broken had found his peace. And under the eternal sky they made their promise again, quietly, simply, forever. Final line. The storm had brought them together, but love, steady, wild, and unyielding, made them stay.